So, Colin, today we're going to talk about intuition.
I knew you were going to say that.
Ah, very nice.
Something told me you were going to talk about that. I don't know what it was.
I told you we were going to talk about that. I sent you an email.
Oh, it was you. Yeah,
it was not intuition. Okay. No, we've all had these experiences though, where we feel like we can anticipate what's coming. I remember the first time I met you, I immediately didn't like you or trust you, and I feel, 8 or 9 years later,
the same.
justified in that. I think in certain ways, in certain settings, intuition might be more valued in business than analysis. We want somebody who, I think it's a large part of expertise. As people perceive others as experts, they just seem to know the answer right away.
Sure.
Your prototypical expert doesn't say, well, give me the data and let me come back to you in a week.
Sure.
The expert has the answer. What to do.
It's the classic of my guts tell me to do this.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Or even saying the phrase, actually, it's a no-brainer means that you
don't need to think about it.
Thought about it. Yeah, it's just obvious. And It may not necessarily be obvious to everybody.
And there's even proponents out there who suggest that we should be relying on our intuition more, that our guts are very wise, or that our lizard brain is, very well attuned to what's going on. The Malcolm Gladwell book, Blink, I think, made this argument.
Yeah.
It was in a very entertaining way. It's a great read. But there's research on this, and I'm here to tell you that it's not that simple. That it's not the case that we should always be trusting our intuition, that our intuitions are not always right. And that the research suggests we can actually anticipate when our intuitions are likely to be good and when we should be more cautious in relying on our intuition.
Does some type of light come on your head or something like? Is there like a red light?
Yeah, that's what you look for. Check a mirror. If there's a physical light bulb glowing above your head, that's when you know your intuition is good. Yeah.
Okay, great. Is that why I never seen one of them before?
Yeah. Keep waiting. It'll happen. I spend a lot of time in dark rooms just waiting for that. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to us about today comes from an economic psychologist, I think is what he prefers to be called, named Robin Hogarth. And so he's been researching intuition for decades. He's written a number of great books on the topic. One that I've read recently is called The Myth of Intuition, or The Myth of Experience, excuse me.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, and so he reviews a lot of the principles. So if you want to go more into depth on that, he's also got YouTube videos up there, and so in order to understand this more, let's talk about what our intuition actually is, and this links back to some of the ideas we've talked about before. So, we talk about intuition being located in our gut, or sometimes in our heart. It may be located in your pituitary gland. I don't know where it is in you, but it doesn't actually exist there. It exists in our minds. Our intuitions come from our minds. And they come specifically from, we've talked about this 2-part model of cognition, where we've got the rational brain and we've got the intuitive brain. Our intuitions come from the intuitive brain, from the system 1, if you like that terminology. It's from this automatic, fast part of our brain. And so to understand what guides our intuitions, we need to understand what guides the intuitive system, what guides the system 1. So our intuitions really are just correlational observations that we make. So if you are out there and that automatic part of your brain is its primary job, in my opinion, is to just put ideas together. So you got all this information coming in, it's just constantly looking for what things are co-occurring. Like, oh, that's happened before along with this thing. Let's link those ideas together. And you get that happening enough, and these connections become strong. So now when you see one thing, you start to expect another.
Yeah. And that's where they talk about, don't they, that human beings are pattern machines.
Yes.
So we pick up patterns of, well, when I do this. I mean, obviously the show is called The Intuitive Customer. And you said a word there, which I think is key for me from a customer experience perspective, which is it's an automatic decision.
Yes.
You don't have to think about it. You just, like me with Apple, I buy Apple I'm not interested in looking. I don't even know what the bloody software numbers are on Windows machines or anything like that anymore. Yeah, you're making an automatic choice, but that choice has been homed over a number of years based upon the experiences and the information you've got and the patterns that you've picked up and everything else.
Yeah, no, I mean your decision to buy Apple without even thinking about it is based in part on your pattern making machine, this automatic system that is pairing positive experiences with using Apple products over time.
Yeah,
And so over years, as you observe other people using Apple products in a way that you like or admire, as you observe their kind of branding, as you experience it yourself, all of these ideas are being connected, and that's forming an intuition of a type that says, well, if it's Apple, then it's got to be good, right? Because those
yeah,
ideas are connected in mind.
sure.
And not only is it happening automatically and outside of your control, you cannot control it. Like this
Sure.
automatic part of the brain is truly automatic. We cannot concentrate and make these connections form intuitively. It's just happening based on what we're exposed to, based on
Sure.
the ocean we're swimming
Sure.
in. Good.
Sure. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So if that's our model of intuition, if that's our understanding, it doesn't come from our guts, it comes from this automatic part, then really our intuitions are in two forms. Some are hardwired, some are automatic. So that there are experiments where they'll take like pre-verbal infants, very, very young children, and show them pictures of snakes and spiders, probably before they've ever been exposed to them before,
Yeah.
and there will be an automatic negative reaction to it.
Sure.
So like heights is another one where
Right.
we can be pre-programmed to fear heights
Yeah.
and to fear certain predator
Sure.
animals.
Must be like
um,
horses where they're born and they automatically stand.
yeah, same thing. Like all of us
Yeah.
come with some like hardware or some software like preloaded, like
Sure.
we react in certain ways. And so those are intuitions, like those exist
Yeah.
in our intuitive system, and some people are able to overcome them. They're stronger for some people than for other people, but they kind of
Sure.
exist for everybody. There's a whole nother set of system or intuitions which are learned. So
Yeah.
we come to be exposed to these ideas over time, and they form automatically, and that's the kind of more useful thing. So when we talk about an expert having great intuition, right?
Yeah.
Presumably, if that's true, and we'll talk about instances where we might think that's true, but it's not actually true. If that's true, it's because their intuitive system has been trained up over time to have a set of good and useful correlations. So if they
Yes.
walk into a situation where it's like, all right, here we've got this business problem, and they're like, okay, I've experienced this a lot before. When it's this kind of business problem, it's this kind
We
of
do that.
solution,
So
right?
this comes back into the other Gladwell book, which was talks about 10,000 hours,
Right.
doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So 10,000 hours to
Is
be
that
an
the
expert
tipping
in
point?
something. No, Tipping Point was a separate book, I think.
He's
Anyway,
written too
can't
many
remember.
books. Malcolm,
Yeah.
if you're listening, slow down.
The outliers, it was
Outliers.
called
There you go.
outliers. And the other part that was making me thinking is that sort of classic of grey hair. So, in other words, you're going to listen to more to someone who has been around the block a few times than somebody that's completely
Yeah.
new. But
No,
that
and
doesn't necessarily mean to say that the person with the grey hair has the answers. This goes back into, and this is why I thought this subject would be interesting. There is this, and I love the title of the book you're talking about, the myth of experience, because it basically says actually it's not necessarily about
right.
experience.
Right. Yeah, and again, it's not that experience is bad or not useful, and it's also not that we can't trust our intuitions, right?
Yeah,
It's not an either or situation. It's not that our intuitions are always right and we should trust them, or that they're always wrong and we should ignore them. It's when can we do one and when the other.
yeah,
So, should you trust the guy with gray hair? No, not all the time. Like there are lots of areas where they're going to be very ignorant. But there's also a lot of data that new pilots and new surgeons are kind of dangerous. Like we want people who have a little bit more experience because
sure,
they've developed more of those connections. So by understanding where these intuitions come from and what can influence them, we can start to anticipate then when might intuitions be useful to us. And
Sure.
this guy Robin Hogarth, he talks about two types of environment. And so he's British too. Robin Hogarth is, and so I assume this is
I
where he
like
came
him
up with
already.
these. Yeah, I thought you might. But he talks about kind environments and wicked environments, which I think is just like such a delightful phrase or
Yeah.
delightful terms to use for that. So when you're in a kind learning environment, there are a couple of key aspects that happen. You receive feedback on your
Yeah.
choices. That feedback comes quickly, and it is a low, I'll call it a low causal density environment. In other words, it's pretty easy to determine what caused what.
Yeah.
And so if you're in an environment with all those characteristics, there's a good chance your intuition will end up being pretty good, right? And
And
so
isn't it as well that you've got all of the information
yeah,
effectively?
yeah, I would link that to this causal density idea. Like
Okay.
if
I'm
there's a
just trying
lot
to
of
put it in
things,
I'm trying to put it in layman's
well,
language,
don't
things that
don't
people would understand.
no, your
Sorry
intuition
about
to make it understandable is no good. Let me complicate it even further. Yes, absolutely. So if I've only got a little bit of information and there's a lot going on, that
Yeah.
is not a kind environment, right?
Sure.
If either there's just not a lot going on and so my little bit of information is enough, like that's
Sure.
enough to know what's going on, or there's a
Sure.
lot going on and I have a pretty good deep understanding, those could be
Sure.
kind of, but if not, they're wicked. So wicked environments are ones that are the opposite. It's where you don't get a lot of feedback on your
Yeah.
decisions. When you do, it's not rapid. So like we're gonna implement this program, we're gonna make this decision, like I'm going to choose to go to this place for college. And then,
Yeah.
like 10 years later, I'll be able to know if that was a good decision or not. That's
Sure.
not a good, that's a wicked environment from an
Sure.
intuitive standpoint. And then also when it's just a very complex setting where there's lots of information, there's lots of potential causes for any effect.
Yes.
So if our intuition is trained in a kind environment, we can probably trust it. It's probably very
Yes.
good. If it's trained in a wicked environment, we probably should not.
Yeah. So as I was looking into this, doing my due diligence before the show,
Checking to make sure if I'm lying. Go ahead, Colin. What were you saying?
it it made me think of. So the keys for me were you can't just trust your guts, which is so I really like the book Blink.
Yeah.
And I thought it was great the way that you could go. I always remember them talking about looking at a statue and
Yeah.
the expert going, "Is this a genuine statue or not a genuine statue?" And the expert could go, "Yes," and you go, "Well, why did he make that choice?" Well, he made that choice because all the various things that he've learned over the years. But the thing that got me was and made me think, yeah, this is so appropriate to customer experience was it's in complex decision making or complex domains. So again, building in your bit about the expert, it's about well, how many experts said that we were going to have the Great Recession?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hardly any.
Yep.
Yeah, virtually none.
Yep.
How many
And the ones that did
experts?
were not listened to. Like they were
Yeah,
rejected as being
absolutely. I
busy.
mean,
Yep.
it's the really good film, The Big Short.
Yep.
So how many experts? And these are people that are running the economies, etc. And then you think of companies like Kodak and Blockbuster, and just think of electric cars. I mean, why in the hell did the auto manufacturers not get on
Yep.
board with electric cars beforehand? So I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's complex domains, and the way it made me think about it was the phrase I love, which is, "I don't know what I don't know."
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know what I don't know, but I still make a decision.
Yeah.
But I'm making a decision based upon potentially incomplete information. But, and here's the key, but I think all of the information is there. So the danger is, building on what you were just saying, I think that I am in a kind environment. I'm making a decision in a kind environment, not realizing, because I don't know what I don't know, that it's actually a wicked environment, and therefore I'm making the wrong judgment. Does that make sense?
I think that was very well put. Um, I also love the phrase "don't know what I don't know." If it's helpful, Colin, I do know what you don't know, and I've got a list here. I can send you an email after. No, it's not always
I don't know
easy.
if Google Mail would be able to manage all of those entries on there.
I'm gonna crash your inbox. Um,
Yeah, it only takes up 25 meg, so you can.
no, your point is a great one. It is not always going to be obvious to us when we're in the situation whether we're in a kind or a wicked learning environment. I think it's
Yes,
a great point, and tying some of these ideas together. So the Malcolm Gladwell book Blink opens with that example about the art experts who had an
yeah,
intuitive feeling that a statue was fake, even though they couldn't put their finger on it. I would argue that according to Hogarth's definition, those art appraisers were operating in a kind environment. So
sure,
even though art is very complicated, it's a relatively circumscribed field. And
sure,
so as you're exposed to more and more of these statues over time, your intuitive system is like putting these links together. And so if you find a statue where the hands are just slightly too big or a slightly different style, then your intuitive system is able to say that doesn't fit with these correlations, even if I can't
sure.
articulate why. And so that was a kind environment. There was another example that he gave in the book, which was of a research institute that studied relationships, where they would videotape a couple interacting for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, and then they would slow down the video and they would break it down, and they would then be able to code all of the responses, verbal and nonverbal, and they would be able to predict with a high level of accuracy whether that couple would be together 5 years later.
Oh yes, I
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah,
And
yeah, I
he
remember that.
gave that as an example of intuition, which was weird to me because that's the opposite of intuition. These
Sure,
researchers didn't watch those people interacting and go, yeah, they're going to get a divorce. They slowed down the tape, they coded everything, they threw it into a model, and then out came the response. And I would argue that most of the things dealing with humans, unfortunately, is going to be a wicked environment
sure.
because humans are just so complex and
Complicated.
they're so,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
doesn't mean we can't predict them, but it means that our intuition is probably not going to be great.
Yeah, now there's a really interesting link here. This is as if we planned this show, mate. So one of
You
the
keep
things
giving
that
away let them think we planned it, Colin. Gosh.
so one of the things that they talked about in that study, because it's always I remember looking into this about 10 years ago, and I think I even contacted them to appear in one of my books. Um, and one of the key emotions that couples that were going to divorce felt was they felt their partner was condescending.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a key.
Yeah.
That if they saw that a partner was condescending, then eventually they would end up getting a divorce. Okay, so how does that apply to custom experience? So as I was thinking about this, it made me think as I was watching these videos, and we'll put some links in the show notes again about the other videos so you can see them as well. But one of the things that I was thinking is, yeah, there are so many organizations that think they know everything about their customers, but when you ask them, what does your customers feel? What emotions do they feel? What drives value?
Yep.
How do you use behavioral science? Do you even understand behavioral science? I was with somebody the other day that never even heard of the subject. You know, they're missing out on so much information that they think they know.
Yep.
They think they're in this kind environment. They think they know what, everything, and therefore they're making decisions based upon what they think they know is the world. But actually, it's because they don't know what they don't know, and they hadn't thought about emotions, what drives value, behavioral science, and all the things that we talk about on the podcast that absolutely, like the iceberg, critically affect the customer's the customer's experience.
Yeah, I think it's a great parallel, right? So if it may be like those relationship researchers where if we're trying to anticipate customer experience or customer behavior, that we have these intuitions that may have been trained up in this wicked environment where and to be clear, your intuitions still exist if you were in a wicked environment. Like your brain is still forming those connections, just the connections are not good. So you've still
Yes.
got an intuition, but what we should be doing instead is what those relationship researchers were doing, which is applying a much more analytical framework where we step back and we incorporate the science and we try to slow things down and get a lot more data. And because we should know that our intuitions are just not going to be that good in these complex settings,
Yes.
usually where people are making decisions because people are just
Yes.
very, very complex.
Yes. So let me try and bring this to life for people by giving people a hypothetical example. But I think this hypothetical example is one that people will relate to.
Good.
So imagine that you've set up you're in this organization and they've set up a customer experience team, and your job is to improve the customer experience. And then imagine 6 months after this customer experience team has been set up, a new product is launched by the company. And then imagine that after the launch of that product, the revenues go up from that organization. Okay. Well, in my experience, a lot of people in that organization would turn around and say, yeah, well, we launched this new product and therefore, sales went up, and that's the reason for the increase. But what they don't know is that actually, when the customer experience team was set up, they spent 3 months doing research. And in the second 3 months, they enacted upon that research because they found out the emotions that customers were trying to evoke. They looked at which things drove value. And actually, it just coincided that the
Yep.
improvements that they made actually were the thing that affected the revenues. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is, which is supporting your point, which is the danger is everybody looks at things in the same way, and their intuition comes up with makes the same old connections that it always has made, and come up with the wrong results, as opposed to looking at things from a different perspective and coming up with new results. And it's a bit like the film Moneyball. I
Hmm.
think everybody must
Absolutely.
have seen that.
Yep.
But for those of you that haven't, it's
I
where
mean, I read the book. If you watch movies, that's fine. That's fine. But I read the book.
well, you're a professor. I wouldn't
Actually,
expect
I did
anything
both.
else.
The movie was great too.
The book, I don't know why, but I think it's just because you can see it in your imagination, can't you? But a book is always better than a film. But
Yeah,
there we go. We
usually is.
digress. But for those of you that haven't seen Moneyball, what it's about is how a baseball team, how they used to go around making decisions was to say, hey, we need a left-hander, we need a batter, whatever it may be, and we need someone that can come in and do this. And it was all based upon experience. And what they did instead was to say, hey, let's just look at the statistics, because
Yeah.
nobody's looking at the bloody statistics. We need somebody that can produce this amount of shots, and this person may not fit your model of what an excellent hitter looks like, but actually look at their statistics. So it's looking at those things from different perspectives, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's a great example because that industry of talent scouts in baseball was entirely intuition driven. And so you had these scouts who would just look at these players and like get a feeling like, yeah, that kid's going to be a breakout star. And
Yeah,
unfortunately, that was a wicked learning environment. The number of baseball players, even very talented baseball players, who become star players is really small. And
sure.
there's a lot of causes. It could be a great player who's just put on a bad staff. Like you put a great player in a bad team, sometimes that's not enough for them to break out, or they could be injured, or they could just have a good day or a bad day when they're observed.
Yeah,
It's not a good environment for strong intuitions to form and be accurate. but everybody who was doing it was just relying on their intuition. And so it was an opportunity for somebody to come in with a different approach and say, well, what if we applied a more analytic, step away from intuition approach? And it became very successful. And that's now taken over the way
Yeah.
these decisions are made there. Yeah.
So let's go into do our usual bit at the end here, mate. What's the so what? So all interesting stuff, but what does this mean that people should do to improve their customer experience? What's your thoughts?
So you should probably not be relying on intuition as often as you are. And I say
Right.
that just because you're a human being who's listening to
Sure.
this. Like all of us should. We want to, right? It makes us very efficient. It makes us very fast. In many cases, it's hard to prove us wrong based off of our intuition, because a lot of the decisions we make are in this kind of gray area where, well, maybe it helped, maybe it didn't. Um, but most of the stuff that we do, especially anything dealing with human beings, it's probably a wicked learning environment. And so we shouldn't trust our intuitions as much as we do. So at least pair your gut feeling with some data and with some, a more analytic approach. There may be, you may just get a bad vibe from somebody, and maybe you shouldn't ignore that. But if that's the only way you're making decisions, you're kind of setting
Sure.
yourself up to fail.
Sure.
The last connection I'll make, and I don't want to divert us, but artificial intelligence systems are kind of artificial intuition systems. So the
Yes.
way, when you build an AI model, there's a training phase, which is where you just feed data into it, and essentially it's doing the machine version of this
What your
automatic
brain
process
does.
of just finding connections and finding
Yes.
links. And so, as great as AI machines are, we should also recognize that those systems, those programs, will be open to the same kind of critique. Are we feeding it with data that will be kind, that will
Yes.
produce good insights, or are we feeding it with a wicked set of data that'll
Yeah.
produce all kinds of wild things? Or are we feeding it with a kind environment? Kind of the last part of this is, if you develop a great set of intuitions in one setting and then we move you over to a different setting, a lot of people will bring their intuitions with them, but now we're in a different setting. It shouldn't apply. Like, there are lots
Sure.
of business examples of business leaders who are really successful, and then so we're going to move you over here and to a different industry with a different set of competitors and a different set of
Sure.
products, and then they fail miserably. And I think some of that is because they're bringing their old, well-trained intuitions into a different environment. So
Yeah.
your intuitions are great, but we need to be really cautious about how and how broadly we apply them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good bit of advice. Let me try and add a couple of other bits, I think, because, and the AI analogy is a good one as well, because the issue for me is AI machines are being built with the people that are building them, their biases.
Absolutely.
So consequently, if you're a left brain thinker and don't think about customer emotions and you don't think about behavioral science, guess what? You're going to build an AI system that is just going to look at the right brain, sorry, the left brain analytical stuff rather than recognize the emotional and behavioral science stuff. So that's the first thing. I think top level, the issue for me is this: you need to be curious. You need to look into things, and you need to think, I don't have all the answers. And I think that's one of the biggest things I learned as a leader early on was I used to think in my 20s that as the leader of the organization, I should have all the answers. What I realized was actually I shouldn't have. I should create the environment where all these things should happen. So, and now we go into diversity and all the rest of it. But the issue becomes it's being curious, it's being taking a step back and going, well, no, actually, we know we need to bring some expertise in from this area or from that area. And again, we've talked about this many times before. We need to experiment and not just rely on our guts.
Yeah.
And I think it's I think the other thing I would say is it's never one thing or the other. Right? And it's never black or white. It's always grey. So we're not saying don't listen to your intuition, but we're also saying, you can't make every decision based on your intuition. So, you end up in this grey area where if you're sensible, you'll use a bit of both.
Yeah. No, you and I have talked before about how expertise and experience will hopefully lead you to make better hypotheses, which you can then test more efficiently.
Yes.
And continue to learn in that way.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. So, in my experience, it's about time that we ended this show.
Yeah, that was smooth. That was well done.
It was good, wasn't it? Did you like the way I did that?
It's nice working with professionals, Colin.
And when you do, let me know. We look forward to talking to you next week on the show. Cheers. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.